every single day, some other LGBTQIA plus person getting the crap beaten out of them. You know, there was definitely a while where I did feel more safe, but not anymore. Not anymore. I now kind of keep
Bobby Berk,
one of the Fab Five on Queer Eye.
Design expert and Emmy-nominated host.
He's decorated hundreds of homes.
He also started his own design company.
to all the people who always told me that I could not be a success in work because people would not accept a gay person. I will show you. It wasn't until 2015 that I got a call from Builder magazine, and they said, and instantly I was like, yes, I can do that. Even though in my mind, I'm like, I have no idea how to do that. I still have a negative physical reaction when I drive by a church.
Wow.
A place that proclaims to have unconditional love, and it is your family in your entire life until one day.
Bobby, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Guy.
I know that you were born in Houston.
I was.
But shortly after you were born, you were essentially adopted by your aunt and her husband, and you grew up in Missouri, a small town. Tell me a little bit about life as a kid in that town in Missouri, Mount Vernon, Missouri.
You know, some people like to pronounce it Missouri or Missouri. I usually pronounce it misery. You know,
with apologies to people in Missouri, please.
Yeah, hey, you know, if you live in Missouri and you are different, like I am, you get what I'm saying. If you live in Missouri and you're not like super different than everybody else, then great, you love Missouri, which is fine. But anybody growing up in Missouri that was just slightly different than the norm understands what I say when I mean that. Because growing up in Missouri, for me, I remember once, God, I had to have been like maybe 5 or 6. And I was in this coffee shop with my dad. And, you know, every morning we'd go into this coffee shop before you'd go out and work on the farm. And all the other farmers were in there, 5:30 in the morning before it even gets sunny. And one of the old farmers looked at me and he's like, "Boy, you're an odd one, aren't you? I don't think you belong here. You belong in New York City or something." And
wow.
I was like,
how old were you?
5 or 6 maybe. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. And I remember that thinking, yeah, I don't even know what New York City is, but I agree with you. You know, this is not for me.
What did it mean when you were a little kid feeling different? Because I have to assume that, you know, as a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old, maybe you had feelings that you would later recognize as being a gay boy and then man, but at the time you probably didn't have language for that. So what did being different mean?
Yeah, no, I absolutely didn't have language for that. I would say didn't have language for that really until I was 12 or 13. And my school got the internet, and I started going down a rabbit hole of what these feelings were. I can't say I can really articulate what made me feel different. I just knew I was. You know, I just knew I wasn't into going out on the ranch, and I hated playing baseball, and like I just, not that all gays don't like sports. Some gays like sports, but for me, it didn't feel right to me, and so I did not fit in with the rest. I don't want to say all the guys, but I did not fit in with the majority of the attitude and the So I didn't feel a part of it. And at the time, again, I had no idea that part of it was me being gay. I just knew I didn't fit in.
What about church? I know this has come up from time to time in your life. I'm an aversion to it today, but I imagine it's connected to just maybe the trauma of going to church and hearing people say things that made you feel excluded as a kid.
I will put it this way. I still have a negative physical reaction when I drive by a church.
Wow.
Like I cannot help but almost hiss when I see a church when I drive by, because it brings back such negative memories of a place that proclaims to have unconditional love, and a place that everyone is accepted and welcomed, and it is your family in your entire life until one day they find out that you are not exactly the same as everybody else, and they completely turn their backs on you. It was the first devastating heartbreak of my life, and one that will never heal.
It's so sad to hear that. I'm sure people listening to who may, be people of faith who go to, like here where I live in the Bay Area in San Francisco, obviously there are many, many well-known, LGBTQ churches and synagogues and community centers. And obviously your experience was very different because of where you were. It was a small town.
For me, I mean, I love that there are those churches out there, because I do think that church can create a great sense of community.
Being sort of quote unquote different, what, not only meant, you were less interested in sports, but also it meant that you were kind of interested in things like design. Like I read that you were really into Legos, or you noticed the Michael Graves collection at Target, which I remember was revolutionary, the teapots and the toasters.
I still have the teapot given to me by Michael Graves.
And you remember seeing that as a kid and sort of, because most kids, 12, 13-year-olds would pass by that and just be like, toaster, but like what you saw that and you're like, this is interesting.
Well, yeah, to me, I walked by that and objects had always been very utilitarian before. Like, a spoon, you used it to shovel food in your mouth. A plate that you carried your food on it. A tea kettle, you made tea in it, boiled water. That's what it was for. I had never looked at an object and thought, this object brings me joy. Yeah. And I can shovel food in my mouth with it. It wasn't until the Michael Graves collection that I was like, oh, there are people out there actually thinking about the way things not only work, but how they make you feel. And I at the time I couldn't articulate it because I could never have imagined at that time in my life that I would be able to do what I do today. But it kind of opened my mind to there's way more out there than farming.
How did you begin to develop an aesthetic? Like, how did you begin to develop a sense of what was nice and pleasing to you?
I don't know, honestly. It was always something in me. I remember when I was 5 or 6, my mom had my room decorated in all red curtains, red bedspread, red rug, red pillows. Because, little boys like red, but I did not. I looked at that. It's a lot of red. Yeah. I looked at that. I was like, this gives me anxiety, even though I doubt I used the word anxiety. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew I did not like the way I felt surrounded by all that red. So I saved up all my birthday money and I went out and I bought everything in blue because I just liked the way blue made me feel. Blue was relaxing. And I found this dinosaur poster at a local Ben Franklin and I pulled all the colors from that poster, and that's the colors I pulled into the room. And it just was a natural thing for me.
Tell me what the impetus was for you to leave at such a young age, such a, vulnerable age. Why did you feel like I have to go now? I've got to leave.
Every day of my life, I wore a mask, and not the kind that we wore during COVID, but one that was a mask that there was not one person in the world that actually knew who was behind that mask. Every day I had to pretend to be, the straight bro that was into girls and, liked sports. And, it made for a very, very lonely childhood that was filled with a lot of depression, because when you know that people only like the fake persona that you're putting on, and then if they knew who the real one was, they wouldn't like you. It's not great on your mental wellness. So on top of some drama that was going on at home, I was just kind of at the point where I either needed to get out and get away to a place where I could be my true self and be who I was and find that chosen family that would accept me, or I might sadly not be around much longer. There was definitely some suicidal thoughts, and I'm just like, well, what's the point of living if you aren't living your true authentic self? What's the point of living if you put on a mask every single day and you have no real connection in your life? So there was a big fight I had with my parents one night, and I was just like, what, this is it. I'm out of here. My mom used to always like the phrase, if you don't like the rules, there's the door. And that night I was like, all right, bye. So yeah, that's why I left. I needed to find real, genuine, sincere connection, and that was not going to happen. Like one guy came out in my high school, and the next day, a bunch of cowboys ran his car off the road and tried to kill him. And I was just like,
Wow.
well, this is not somewhere where I can come out and be safe. So
And there was probably almost nobody to talk to.
no one.
So you were experiencing probably some crippling depression.
Yeah.
I know that you left home when you were 15 and you got a job in Branson, Missouri. But where did you 15 is so young. I mean, first of all, where did you live?
Yeah. So I lived in my car. I couch surfed.
Okay.
I mean, at some points I would be back living in my car. At some points I lived on the street. I did what I had to survive.
But Branson is like a sort of a holiday town, a music town, right? I mean,
it's so weird. If you put Vegas. It's like if you put Vegas in the middle of the Ozark Mountains, but with not headliners.
Did you feel a little bit more liberated there, going there as a gay man?
Honestly, the only reason why I went to Branson, I don't even think I've ever talked about this before. The only reason why I went to Branson is because there is a guy I had met that lived in Branson, and he was in one of the shows there, and I went there to be close to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did that relationship last very
No,
long?
no. I think like a week and a half after I moved there, I realized he had a wife and kids. Yeah. So I was like, oh yeah, no, never mind. And then once I realized that relationship was not going anywhere, that was summertime. It was about time to start going back to school, and I did not want to drop out of school. I fully planned on continuing my education, and I didn't want to continue it in Branson. That was a small town conservative. So I wanted to go to school in Springfield, Missouri, at Kickapoo High, which is where Brad Pitt went. And so I went to enroll myself in school, and my parents, when you're underage, your parents have to enroll you.
Yeah.
And so my parents tried to use that as an excuse to force me to come home. They're like, if you want to go to school, you're going to live at home. And I said, well, no, I'm not. And so I went to court and I had myself emancipated, and I enrolled myself in school.
So you and presumably all this with a goal in sight, which was to get out of Dodge. Like you were going to get out the minute you could.
Yeah. And again, Springfield was a bigger city, 250,000 people. There were gay bars, there were gay people. Like I could actually be who I was. When I moved to Springfield, I was working at Applebee's. Applebee's has always been my fallback job. Hey, if this Queer Eye thing doesn't work out, maybe I'll go work at Applebee's
tips.
again. Yeah. Well, not many at the one
Good
in Missouri.
drinks, decent drinks.
So I was working in restaurants, and I was working at the Gap. I was working at the Body Shop. I think in Springfield, I worked at Structure, which is now Express. But yeah, that's how I afforded it. I found an apartment in Springfield that was furnished.
When you got your own apartment for the first time, what did you? And presumably you didn't have any cash. You didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the way you decorated it?
My very first apartment came furnished.
Came furnished.
Yeah, I mean, and not furnished well. The living room furniture I remember was like outdoor wicker furniture or something. It was not nice, but yeah, that's how I afforded it. I found an apartment in Springfield that was furnished, because I definitely didn't have the money to get an apartment and get furniture.
And so when you did have your first place that you furnished, did you already, like if you take me back into that apartment and you describe it, and you look at it now, can you already see the beginnings, sort of the twinklings of
Everything was black and white. And
it was all black and white.
Everybody at home that can't see me, I'm sitting in front of black and white wallpaper in my office. Do you remember Finger Hut? I don't think they're still around, but it was this mail order catalog. And
yes, I do.
And it wasn't just furniture. Like they had everything, like pool floaties and this and that. And I remember them sending me a catalog and offering me a credit line. And I think it was maybe like $500. But I used that $500 credit line to order myself a black futon and a black futon chair and a black coffee table and side tables and a floor lamp and 2 side table lamps. And then I went to, it was called Gordman's. I don't even know if it's still around. It's kind of like Marshall's or HomeGoods. And I got a few Ansel Adams prints. And that was my first apartment. It was all black and white. It was all very masculine, very sleek. And that to this day, that's still my aesthetic. And then I think going through the phase in my life where I didn't have a home, I lived in my car, or I couch surfed, or, I literally, there was a week I lived on the streets. It really made me understand the importance of home. And one of the main things being just the feeling of safety in the home, because that I didn't have. So yeah, I don't know when I'd say I developed it or how I did it. I've kind of always just had that instinct, and I've always had the instinct to make my home work for me and to make my home give me that sense of security. And so ever since I was homeless, I have never after that day lived in a place that was not mine. Like the lease was not in my name. I would get a place and I would bring in roommates, but after that, just that sense of no control, of not being in control of the roof over your head. I've never allowed myself to be in that position again.
Yeah. Bobby, I know when just before you turned 18, you did get out of Dodge and you moved to Denver, and got a job at a furniture company. I'm curious, at that time, when you were 17 years old, did you have a sort of an idea of what you were going to do or wanted to do with your life? I mean,
no.
Obviously you have, and we'll get there with what you built today, but you strike me as an ambitious person, and that you had dreams to do something bigger, to be bigger. Is that true already at that time?
I think so. And I also think that I owe a huge thank you, maybe, to all the people who always told me I would never amount to anything, who always told me I would never be loved, who always told me that society would not accept me, who always told me that I could not be a success in work because people would not accept a gay person. I think my drive to succeed has always just been kind of I will show you, and I will show you different. So yeah, thanks to all those people who told me I couldn't. It just forced me and drove me to do more and be more.
You moved to New York when you're 21. This is in the early 2000s, and you got a job at Restoration Hardware, now known as RH.
Yeah.
And when you got to New York, what do you remember about, like, thinking about what you were going to do with your life? Did you think, okay, this is great, I'll get a job at a store like Restoration Hardware and be a manager and maybe work my way up, or were you already thinking bigger at that point?
So honestly, when I moved to New York, I just wanted to be in New York. My only plan was that I was going to get a job as a server. I was like, I can always, because that was always my fallback. Anytime, like, I could always walk into a restaurant and walk out of there with a job. I don't think I ever walked in and applied.
You were a good waiter?
I was a great waiter. I had fun doing it. To me, it was like an acting job. Every table I'd put on a different voice and this and that. Like, I would have fun with my guests. So I always enjoyed waiting tables. It wasn't always the best money in Missouri, but it was always a good fallback. And right when I was leaving Denver, I was actually working at this high-end Italian restaurant called Cucina Calore in Cherry Creek, which I think it's still there. And so I was like, I'll just go get a job at a fancy restaurant in New York too, and I'll make good money. But I get to New York and I realize that restaurants there will not hire you unless you have New York City experience. And so my whole plan of just going in and getting a job as a server didn't work out. It took me 3 months of pounding the pavement, applying to probably 100 jobs before I got the job at Restoration Hardware. And that was in the middle of summer. I would wear a suit to every interview. I did not even have enough money to take the subway, so I would have to walk up and down Manhattan dripping wet in sweat. But yeah, Restoration Hardware, it took me 3 months to get that job. Yeah.
Wow. It was an amazing store. Still is an amazing store today, but it was a very different store. But I mean, it must have been just like a crash course, almost like getting a university degree in design. I know later on in life you would get an honorary degree from an actual design school, but you didn't have the money probably even to go to design school, but this was almost like kind of like that, right? In a sense, I mean, you were around some really quirky, interesting stuff.
It was because I got to work with people, and it helped me hone in my sense of space, and sense of scale. What I find, a lot of designers, they might know how to put together pretty things, but they don't understand scale. And so the scale of furniture they put into a room, either width or depth or height, will be off. But working at a retail store where you worked in a place that had a lot of big furniture in a city with a lot of small spaces, you figured out how to make things work a little bit more. So yeah, working at Restoration Hardware definitely was a nice little training session of figuring out that design was something that I wanted to do with my whole life.
When did you? I know that there was a stint after that where you worked for Bed Bath & Beyond, which I've heard was like the worst job you.
Yeah, I used to cry on my way to work. Yeah.
But I mean, clearly you were interested in home goods design, but when did you kind of land on this as a thing you wanted to do? Because you're Restoration Hardware, but then you go to Bed Bath & Beyond, which seems like a kind of a sort of, there's some home goods there, but it's
it was
it's
a job.
Bit of a different.
Yeah, again, it was retail management. Yeah.
And so retail management seems like the direction you were going into. But when did you start to think, maybe design is my thing, or maybe like home goods or being around this stuff?
2015.
Okay, so it took a while.
Yeah. Because so after Bed Bath & Beyond, I went to work for an Italian linen company, and then I ended up working for a company named Portico, which I don't know if you remember Portico.
Yeah. And this was just describe it for people who don't remember.
So Portico was a high-end boutique furniture company. So super chic. They had stores in Boston and San Francisco, Chicago, and New York. Like, it was like the cool small business design store.
And you got a job there just as a like a sales rep.
No,
right?
No, as the manager, as an assistant manager. I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Italian linen company that I worked for manufactured like bath towels and robes and stuff for Portico, and it did not work out at the Italian linen company at all. We had definitely butted heads with the owner. And at that point, though, the owner of Portico, Doug Abrams, was like, hey, just come work for me, man. Come work for me. You're great. Come work for me. So I started out as a manager. I then ended up in buying, and then I started developing their e-commerce division, because back then, I mean, there was no buying anything online, especially not furniture. And then in the end, I worked my way up to creative director. And then one day the company went bankrupt, and I quickly cloned the database that I had built for their e-commerce, and I went online and I registered BobbyBerkHome.com, and I launched BobbyBerkHome.com that night, thinking that I'd sell a sofa or two maybe while I looked for another job, because I definitely didn't think that this business that I threw together in an afternoon would become a success.
Can I just dig a little deeper on that for a moment? I mean, here you were like, 25, 26. And you're a kid from a small town in Missouri in New York City, the center of design in the U.S., the center of fashion, the global center of fashion. And you really were like, not only, kind of embraced it, but you really started to develop an ability to identify cool things. Mm-hmm. How did you go from, working for Portico to like overnight developing a website and then selling stuff through the website? How did you do that? Because it's amazing. I mean, it's, if you just think about that objectively, most 25, 26-year-olds, they wouldn't even know how to figure that out, including me when I was 25 or 26.
I was lucky enough that when, I was at Portico and I was developing their e-commerce, I was, we had hired an outside e-commerce company, Tor E-commerce, down in San Diego, and they were helping me develop it. And as they were helping me, I was learning, and I was learning how to code and HTML and SEO. And so that night when I got the letter that Portico was going under and everything needed to shut down, it was just, I can't say that there was something in me that I was like, oh, this is a great idea and this is what I'm going to do and this is going to be what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Literally that night, I was just like, how am I going to pay my rent?
Right.
How am I going to eat? Okay, let me just clone what I did for Portico. They're not going to use it anymore. It's going out of business. And I'll try to just at least hustle a little bit to be able to pay my rent while I look for another job, because I knew, another job might not just fall in my lap the next day. So it wasn't like, this is a great new business. This was how can I make a couple $100?
And you knew presumably you knew how to source the sofas and the furniture. Like you could put the pictures on the website, and if you got an order, you knew how to source them.
Yeah, so I had done that for Portico, and it was a lot of Portico's manufacturers, and then I had made relationships with other manufacturers who we didn't carry in the store, but we were just carrying online. And I actually remember when I launched Bobby Berk Home, I got an email from the owner of the biggest furniture line that I had on the website, basically a cease and desist. Like, you do not have our permission to have our product on your website. Like, we don't have a relationship with you. We had a relationship with Portico. And I called her pretty much almost in tears. And I'm like, hey, just please give me a chance. Please give me a chance. Give me 30 days. Give me 60 days. Just give me a chance. And she was nice enough to say, okay. And fast forward a few years later, I was their largest U.S. retailer.
Wow.
Yeah. So my biggest hurdle though was getting manufacturers to let me carry their stuff, because everyone was like, online, no one's going to order anything online, especially furniture. They only wanted to sell to people who had a physical store.
But this was actually an incredible moment in e-commerce, even though it was still really new and people were still nervous about putting their credit cards online. Yeah. It was a time where simply by using SEO and by getting some cheap, Google ads that weren't yet
there weren't even
expensive.
Google ads yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or like
SEO, manipulating the internet. Yeah.
Basically for nothing, you could actually attract a lot of eyeballs just by using the right words.
Yeah, because there was nobody out there. So if you understood SEO at all, you could drive a lot of traffic to your store, which is what I did. But then, again, my biggest hurdle was getting manufacturers to want to work with me when I only had a website. So eventually I opened up a store in Soho.
How did you do that? I know that I think it was that previous Italian linens company that was going out of business, and you basically bought them out, and they had a store in Soho?
Yeah, so they had a store in Soho, and the owner of it, who had fired me, a couple years before, telling me I was an idiot and I'd never amount to anything. I get a call from him one day, and he had seen my website, and he's seen that I had a brand now. And basically he was like, oh, I see you have a brand. It seems to be doing really well. I opened up a store in Soho. It is not doing very well. Do you want to buy into my company and become my partner? And his deal was take on all my debt, pay me $50,000 in cash, and I'll let you own half my company. And all of my friends were like, that is the worst, stupidest deal you could ever take. But I looked at it different. Where they saw that large lease as something that would hold me back and something that was a negative in the con line, I looked at it as a pro. I looked at it as an asset. I'm like, brands, designers work decades, their entire lives, to be big enough to have a store in Soho.
In Soho, yeah.
Like when you are a brand with a store in Soho, you have made it. You are on a global stage. And I looked at it, if I can make this really bad deal work, I will skip decades of work.
Wow. So the deal was you pay him $50,000, you take on the debt, and then you're 50-50 owners.
Yeah. I took out a cash advance on my boyfriend's credit card, which is now my husband. So it was a good investment for him.
Good investment.
So I took out a cash advance at a very high interest rate on a credit card. And I went into his store and I turned it into, I went to all the manufacturers that he owed all this debt to that he hadn't been able to pay. And I somehow talked them into extending a credit line to me and sending me product. And I brought in all these really beautiful Italian linens that were discontinued for them. So closeouts, that's how I talked them into. I was like, just send me all of your closeout stuff that you can't get rid of. And I hired a guy to stand on the corner of Broadway and Spring in New York with a big sign on it that said Italian linen sample sale, 50 to 90% off. And I just packed that store full of boxes of really great linens. And I had it as a sample sale location. And in 6 months, I paid off all his debt.
Wow. Because you were basically, it was like a fire sale. You were just selling this great stuff.
Yeah, I always say, I'm like, I should have just continued having an Italian bedding sample sale location. Like, it was such a cash cow. My vision was to have a brand. And so, I wanted to make Bobby Berk a brand.
And so this was your store. I mean, you took a massive risk, right? Because you had this lease, but how did you get people into the store? What were you doing right?
I don't know. People have asked me that before, and I think it was just we had a unique look. We had a unique look, and we were at a good price point. Like, I had decided in the very get-go that I wanted my brand to be accessible, because I've always felt like design should be democratized and that design is not just for the wealthy. So we had a product that people wanted. We had a price that people wanted it at. And we were a young, cool brand. We were a New York City brand. People knew that. They knew that this was the only store, that we weren't some big corporate furniture store like pretty much everything else out there. And I mean, I was in that store every single day myself, 363 days a year, 7 days a week from open to close. And people liked that, they liked coming in and dealing with the owner. And
so, all right, so you've got this store and you open more stores, and presumably it's a grind, right? I mean, you're probably working, you're running a small business at this point, but also, it must have been, I don't know, and maybe you just didn't have time to reflect on it, Bobby, but did you ever reflect on this idea that here you were in your, early 30s running a pretty successful small business, and you come from you were around kids who grew up in Manhattan and went to, the finest schools, and here you are, this kid from Mount Vernon, Missouri, doing this, kind of making it in New York. Did you ever reflect on that? Did you feel that at the time?
No. I mean, I could probably say I still don't. I am that type of person where I never feel it's enough. I guess I always have something to prove. I always have more to prove. I've always been one that dwells more on my failures than my successes, but I do understand that the failures is what creates the successes.
Absolutely. Yeah. The failures are what matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you sort of got deeper and deeper into furniture and into selecting furniture and then also to designing your stores, you had a store in I think Atlanta,
Miami, Atlanta, LA, Miami, New York, yeah.
And you presumably it also made you more of an expert, really an expert as a designer. When did you start to get asked by people, "Hey, can you design my house? Can you furnish my house and make it look cool?"
For me, it was just kind of a natural evolution in my stores, because if I was going to my customers' homes and helping them design it, they were buying more. If I was giving them those services for free. So it kind of started in my store, and that would be me just picking out pretty things. I wasn't a designer. I wasn't doing floor plans. I draw stuff out sometimes, but I wasn't, doing electrical plans. I wasn't dealing with construction. It was just, I'm going to help you pick out pretty things for my store. And it was just a way to increase sales.
Yeah.
It wasn't until 2015 that I got a call from Builder Magazine. And they said that they had hired a PR firm, Ketchum PR, to tell them who was the most famous millennial designer. And it was me. And in my mind, I was like, that's funny because I'm not a designer. I am a curator of pretty things. I am a retailer. I am a merchant. But I definitely did not consider myself a designer, because a designer, you got to go to school for. A designer, you need to know all this stuff that I don't know.
You need to know CAD and all
I still don't know CAD. And so they were like, we are calling because every year we do these show homes for the International Builder Show in Vegas. And this year we're doing them with TriPoint Homes, and it is all about what millennials want in their home. It was back when people still cared about what millennials wanted.
About millennials, nobody cares about them
nobody
anymore.
cares about us now. And so they're like, we're building 2 show homes from the ground up. So again, it was not just picking out pretty things. It was construction documents and electrical plans and like tile layouts and like actual real design. And they're like, we want you to design them. Can you do that? And instantly I was like, yes, I can do that. Even though in my mind, I'm like, I have no idea how to do that. But I've always been a believer in within reason, don't say you can do medical things, but, saying you can do it and then figuring out how to make it happen. You lose so many opportunities if you're just like, oh, I don't know how to do that. And they're like, okay, well, never mind, I'm moving on. But I was always like, yeah, I can do that. I'll figure it out. And I'd figure it out. And I got on Google and YouTube and I figured it out. And I figured out that I could just manipulate the floor plans in Photoshop. I didn't even need CAD. I definitely don't recommend doing that now, but at the time I figured it out. That's not how my firm does it now. And right around that time, I had also really started getting burnt out with retail. As a small retailer with 4 stores, but with 4 stores and spread out with thousands of miles, anytime there was an issue, I was the one that had to deal with it. And I was like, you know what? Yeah. Retail is killing me. My whole point of getting into retail was to build my brand awareness to where I could start doing other things. And that had already started happening. Companies were coming to me for interior design. Companies were coming to me to license my products and my designs. So I decided that I would, as leases were up, I would start getting rid of those stores.
Even though they were profitable.
Yeah, they were profitable, but they were killing my marriage. They were physically killing me. I was miserable.
And so there wasn't any moment where you're like, yeah, I'm sure people came up to you, maybe investors, and they're like, Bobby Berk should be in every city in America. It should be like CB2. It should be everywhere.
There was some talk of that. Yeah. But you just had no interest in that. You were burned out. I had no interest in giving away one single percentage of my company. I built that from the ground up. I built it with no loans. I built it with no investment. My expansion was on organic expansion alone. And anytime somebody would come to me, they would want such a big piece of it. I'm just like, hey, I'm doing fine on my own. I've opened up 4 stores on my own. I will keep growing, mind you, slower than I would if you came in. And, looking back, was that the best decision? Maybe not. But I think that was, would I be where I am today if I was this, retailer with stores all over the US, would I have been on Queer Eye? Probably not. Like that opportunity probably wouldn't have presented itself.
As you sort of, had this thriving design career going, you got contacted by the producers for a reboot of. Originally, I think the show was on Bravo, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and they wanted to reboot it on Netflix. And I guess what happened? Somebody contact you and say, "Hey, you want to doing the show? What's the story?"
So my publicist at the time, I forget if they contacted her or if she had heard they're casting and she contacted them. But
you had a publicist to help you get like jobs as a designer or jobs on TV.
Well, she had been with me since I had my stores. So I had worked with her for years.
All right, so you get a call, or your publicist gets a call, and what happens? What they say, hey, we want to talk to him to see if he might be right for the show.
Yeah, so ITV set up a Skype interview with me, and I thought it went horrible. And I mean, I had such a cute background set up in my apartment to do this, and like 10 or 15 minutes before the power goes out in my building. And so I had to jump in my car and drive to my office as fast as I could, which was luckily only a couple miles away. But by the time I got up there, like, it was all hot and sweaty and disheveled, and like the back of the basic brick white wall behind me was not cool at all. And I just didn't think it went well. So I was like, all right, well, that was fun. I'll never hear from them again. But then I was designing, I was installing a home I had designed for Modernism Weeks in Palm Springs. And my publicist was there with me, and she was like, oh my God, I just got an email. They want you to come for in-person auditions, and they're only bringing in like their top 40 of the thousands of guys that they've auditioned.
But they're only going to pick 5.
They're only going to pick 5. Yeah.
Still, the odds are not great.
No. So I'm like, all right, I might as well, just go to this and see what the deal is. So the next day they're like, we want you to come in, and we're going to do this speed dating thing. Basically, we've got 3 tables set up with ITV Scout and Netflix executives, and you're going to sit at each table for 5 minutes and talk to us, and that's it. Well, design was the last category to get to go in. So I think I sat around for 15 hours. And I also was super sick. I had the flu. So I was downing Dayquil and Sudafed to stay awake. So I went in there, I had my little speed dating moment, and I was like, all right, yeah, that went fine. But they're like, we'll call you tonight if we want you to come back tomorrow. And so midnight came around. They still hadn't called. It wasn't until about 1:30 in the morning that David Collins, a creative queer eye, called me, and he's like, hey, we just want to let you know, we want you to come back, and not to give anything away, but you're our first choice.
Wow.
So that was the first moment that I was like, oh my God, I might actually get this job. But then the next morning I get there, and they had sent home all but like 2, maybe 3 people from each category, except my category. Almost every single guy from my category was still there. So when I walked in, I was like, well, they totally said that to everybody, that they were the first choice, because everyone in my category except for one person is still here. So the next day they started doing some chemistry testing with us, seeing how we all worked with each other. And so they would put us, one guy from each category in a room together and do like these little faux episodes. And they just started rotating us in and out. And that first day, the second day actually, Karamo and Tan and I ended up sitting next to each other and just really clicked. And so anytime we weren't doing auditions, we would just come back to each other, and like it kind of became our little group. And then Jonathan twirled in, and Anthony kind of became a part of it. And
wow, we
had this real
it's
connection.
Like the Avengers, right? It really is.
The big gay Avengers.
Everybody's got a superpower.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of that day, I even created a group text calling us the Fab Five, whether we got it or not. We were great friends already. And I think they saw we had a real genuine connection. We actually enjoyed each other, and it felt real. It felt like we had known each other a long time. And then I remember it was probably like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. We finally went to take a bathroom break, and we walked out into the ballroom that everybody else had been waiting in, and there was nobody else there. Like everybody else had been sent home. And so we kind of looked at each other and were like, oh my God, we got this. And it literally was a few weeks until we finally all knew that we had gotten the show.
I sort of almost hesitate to ask this question because it could elicit a canned answer, but I have a feeling you'll give me an honest answer, which is, what's your relationship like with your co-hosts?
I think it's great. I would describe my relationship with my co-hosts like siblings. There are some days we want to pull each other's hair out, but if anybody else tried to pull their hair out, we'd beat the crap out of them. We are family. There are good days and there are bad days with family, but at the end of the day, we are family, and we're so lucky that we get to work with people that we really genuinely have a whole lot of fun with. And that we know support us and love us, just like a big brother or little brother would.
I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of original Netflix shows that are commissioned all the time. And many of them, last a season or are buried, and most people don't know about them. I've actually narrated Netflix documentaries. Hopefully people have heard it, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Most of them aren't well known. But are you surprised at how massive, at how much of a cultural touchstone Queer Eye became?
I think now with this last season that just came out, plus the Japan season, that we're now the longest running Netflix original ever, I think, or maybe tied with Grace and Frankie. But yeah, I mean, I'm shocked. I remember
a show about 5 gay men, helping right? It's the concept is great, but it's not necessarily a slam dunk, and it was.
I think it was, our show is about how we make people feel, not just about themselves, but about the world around them. I think we came along at a really pivotal time in America and the world, for that matter, a very divisive time in the world where everyone was being pitted against each other based on their political affiliations and religion and sexuality, and we came on the screen and taught people how to love each other again and to love themselves. And I think that's really been the key to our success. Is our show is really just about bridging the gaps and bringing people together in a time where nobody was.
When were you able to be who you were out in the open?
I would say I fully. I would say never.
Wow.
Yeah, if you really want to get literal about it, I would say never. My husband and I were in Alberta, Canada a couple of weeks ago, and this is no dig at Alberta. I just am very cautious of any place I do not know that well. But we were walking through a small town, and my husband grabbed my hand to hold it. And I remember actually flinching away and being like, I told him, I was like, stop, you don't know this town. So yeah, I'd say never. I never am ever fully able to be my true authentic self. It depends on where I'm at. Yeah.
And probably so much of that is connected to just the fear that you had that was engendered as a kid. Just the environment you were in.
Yes, but also the fear of what's literally going on now. I mean, I don't think straight people get this news like we do, but as gay people, we there is that gay Twitter and gay TikTok, we get fed the algorithms, and we see the stories on NBC Out and Advocate of every single day some other LGBTQIA plus person getting the crap beaten out of them just for walking down the street with the holding hand, or just for walking down the street looking different or wearing the clothes that they want to wear. So it's not just a fear of growing up, it's a fear of the right now. Because, I think a lot of times people who aren't in the community assume, oh, it's 2023. You guys are safe. There's crazy out there, but you guys are safe. And no, I wouldn't say that. And it's not even just in the small towns. It's in London. It's in New York. It's in LA, more than ever. There was definitely a while where I did felt more safe. But not anymore. Yeah, not anymore. I now kind of keep again, like when my husband goes to hold my hand on a main street in a town I'm not familiar with, I'm like, let's just not do that. Let's not draw attention to ourselves. You never know who you're gonna run into, especially in a foreign country. Not like Canada is that foreign, but
When you think about what you do, obviously what you do on the show is you make over homes that or community centers or things that people, you sort of make their dreams come alive. And I think about how you approach a room, or how you think about, bringing a room together, for example. And I want to ask you about that. Let's just take, I know it's hard because it's all context specific, but, let's take a blank room that you walk into. And 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 somebody says to you, make this habitable, make this a place I want to be in. How do you look at that room? It's a rectangular empty space. Does your brain start to imagine things on the wall? Does it start to sketch like?
My brain first starts thinking about functionality. I think that a lot of designers are, very talented, but they start thinking about aesthetics first and how to make it pretty. Yeah. I think about how it's going to function, how it's going to be used.
How are you going to use it?
Yeah. And I figure that out. And then I'm like, okay, well, now let's figure out how to make it pretty. But for me, my approach to design is about who is going to be living in it. It's about the client. People can design their homes around trends or what they think is hot and what they see in magazines. I really think that is the worst way you could design your home. I think that your home should be designed with things, and you should fill your home with things that make you happy, that you're passionate about, because ultimately your home is like your phone charger. If your phone doesn't get charged fully the night before, it's not going to make it through the next day. Your home's that charger for you. It's got to recharge you. And the only way to do that is to fill it full of things that make you happy.
When you look at a room, like let's say a living room, where do you start? I mean, do you start with one focal point piece and then build around it?
I mean, if it's a blank space with absolutely nothing already chosen, like there's not a fireplace, I usually will start with a sofa, because that is the biggest piece in the room. So if it's just a completely blank slate, we start with that and then we work around it. So if there's something already in the room, I start to design from that. If there isn't, I'll usually start with a sofa. But that's not always the case. I don't really have a hard, fast rule on where I start with a room, because I might find a random throw pillow, or I might find a single vase that will inspire, or a single flower that will inspire the design of an entire room. So for me to really say where I would start, I would actually say that I don't have an answer for that, because you really never know what item is going to inspire the inspiration for the room until you see it.
When you think about how far you've come, right? I mean, even those 4 stores that you had, that was a massive success. Certainly from certainly a long distance from where you came from and grew up to now in the design business, and obviously your brand is significant. What does your ambition tell you about where you want to be? I mean, you're still a young guy. You're in your early 40s. So where do you want Bobby Berk to be in like 10 or 20 years? Do you want it to be like, Martha Stewart brands with a line of paints and, home decor, Target, like the Michael Graves line that you saw as a kid? I mean, what do you think?
I do. I definitely want to keep building it more. We're always working on the next big thing. I'm definitely not ready to retire, although maybe I would like to soon. But yeah, I've been working 7 days a week, 363-4 days a year since I was 15. I'm tired, but not tired enough. Yeah, I definitely see myself continuing going and trying to become even more of a household name.
Bobby Berk, thanks so much. It was great having you, and congratulations with everything you've been doing, and I'll keep following you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Awesome. All right, my friend. I will talk to you soon.
Hey, it's Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And for the audio version, just open up your favorite podcast app, search for The Great Creators, and tap follow.